As a music producer with a few years of experience under my belt, sometimes it's really easy to forget what it's like when you're just starting out. I've kind of forgotten some of the things that I didn't initially know when I started making music, like how to actually play the piano, for example. After reading some of the comments in my tutorials, I decided to make a challenge for myself. So here it is. Today I'm going to try to show you how to make an authentic sounding classic kung fu movie composition while playing absolutely no chords, just single note melodies, and while still trying to keep it in depth for those of you who still want the detailed producer gems. Let's do it. So I started this sample with a Mellotron guitar playing the main melody, and I used a plugin that is outdated at this point, but thankfully I bounced the MIDI to audio, so we do have that. So like I said, unfortunately, I don't have the plugin, so I can't show you the effects, but there is an effect from the plugin on the guitar. It's a rotary cabinet, and that's what's making the guitar have that old school sounding vibrato to it. And then other than that, I just have this EQ here where you can see I'm just cutting out the low end. Now for the second sound, I have another tape guitar that's playing at a lower octave, and that one's just a guitar one-shot sound that I found and then put into the ESX24. But if you don't have Logic and you want to do something like that, then you can just use Contact, or if you have FL Studio, you can just easily just drag the sound into that. Here's what it sounds like. And for this guitar, I actually can show you the effects. The first one that I have here is actually a rotary cabinet, and I'm using that because I wanted to have the same old school vibrato guitar sound as the first guitar does. And then next up, I just have some EQ on it. So now for this track, I want you to keep two things in mind when you're listening to it. The first one is how the layers in the B section start to work together. And then the second one, and probably the more important one for this track, is how each of the instruments in this track has its own rhythm that's contributing to the feel of the track. Now for the next sound, I'm using some guitar licks that I found on Splice. I just transposed them and changed the pitch until it was in the same key as the song. Now for the effects on these, I'm using this guitar amp that comes stock in Logic, and I'm using the Ready to Record preset, and it's basically a British amp and cab combo. The original sound was fine, but it was a little thin, and it wasn't quite giving me the vibe that I wanted. Here's what it sounds like before, and then after. And for the kids keeping score at home, here's what everything sounds like so far. So we got three sounds, and I feel like it's already coming together. So next up, I have some epic French horns from Contact, and this is really just from the basic orchestral library that they have. And really, this is still the old library that they have. And then as far as the effects go, I have this Red 3751 from Waves. And what I'm mainly using it for is for a little bit of saturation because of the sound of the plugin. And then I'm also boosting up some of the high tones and the low tones. And to be totally honest with you, this is pretty much what I use this plugin for all the time. Like, I love the way that this plugin handles horns. That's what she said if it applies. Moving on to the bass line, I have the Scarby Rickenbacker bass in Contact, and I'm using the Ideal Standard preset. Now for the bass, I definitely have a couple of plugins doing some things. So the first plugin that I have here is this R bass from Waves, and it's basically working on the root note frequency. The next plugin that I have on the bass is a plugin that I find works really, really good on bass, which is the Harrison 32C. And I'm using the Bee's Knees bass preset, and I just kind of tweaked it a little bit. But here's what the bass sounds like without it. With it. It's almost like it actually made it sound like a real bass. And then last in the bass chain, I have this R compressor where I'm basically doing some light compression. I really just wanted to kind of catch a little bit of the attack because I didn't want it to poke too much through, but just enough. And then I also wanted to kind of bring up the tail end of the bass so it sounded more even. So next up, we have some percussion. I have a ride, a congo, and some tambourine. And all of that is coming from different instances of Addicted Drums. Probably my favorite drum kit plugin. And I'm really just playing it really light because, again, we just want the rhythm for this track. And then in terms of effects, on the individual tracks, I'm not really doing much, but later I'll show you what I'm doing to all of the drums together. And now we're pretty much in the home stretch. The last instrument that I have here is a Rhodes that I have in the B section for some urgency. And for that, I'm using the initial preset in the Lounge Lizard EP4. And yeah, as far as the effects are concerned on this one, I'm just EQing out some frequencies here. And now we get to move on to the processing, and then you get to see what the whole thing sounds like together. So for the processing on this track, I basically have all of the instruments except for the bass guitar running to its own bus channel, and then I have the drums running to their own bus channel, and then I have everything else on the track, including those two bus channels, running to a submix channel that I have a couple of effects on. So for the instruments bus, I'm starting off with the Studer A800, and I'm basically using this to add some saturation and some really light noise. Next up, I have an EQ where I'm taking out some frequencies that I don't really like in the track as a whole, and then I'm using a CLA2A to do a little bit of compression and kind of glue together all the instruments. Now the drum channel is interesting because I'm hitting it with two separate stages of saturation. The first one being the RC20. As you can see here, I'm using the Drum Break 3 preset. I turned down the noise and I actually raised the distortion up a little bit. And then I'm using the Abbey Road J37 from Waves, and I'm adding a little bit more saturation to the percussion down here. And then last, I'm doing a little bit more EQ. And then the last processing channel that I'm going to show you before I let you hear everything together is I have the submix channel where I'm basically running everything on the track through this RC20. With this RC20, I'm actually kind of using it as an EQ. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize that the RC20 is doing with the presets that they have in there is it's using this EQ cut. Taking off some of the really high frequencies and then some of the really low frequencies in your track can actually kind of have an instant old school effect on it. And the reason for that is between the equipment, the tape that they recorded on, and most importantly, the speakers that people were listening to music on, they didn't really have the ability to hear the really high frequencies and then the really low frequencies in songs. So by cutting enough of the high and the low frequencies, I'm actually helping the sample to have that old school sound. And then you put everything together and here's what it sounds like. Now, I definitely could have added more to this sample, but now hopefully you get an idea of what you can do even if you don't have full knowledge of how to play chords. And if you like that, but you're still a little confused about where to start in terms of how to get better as a producer and make your own compositions, check out this video right here.